Hello, everyone. It is Laurie and Jennie of Astropath, and we're here again today to do another video. Today, we are going to be talking about the amazing conjunction between Jupiter and Uranus, which is happening on April 20th, 2024 at 21 degrees Taurus. It happens at 10:27 p.m. in Eastern Time. So, wherever you are on the planet, you can adjust your time for that. But this is a big deal, and we're going to have a big old conversation about it. But before we get into that, please take a moment and help us out. Subscribe to our channel and like the video if you like the video, and leave us comments. We love to hear from you. We've been getting a lot of comments lately, and we are not always able to respond to them immediately, but we do certainly appreciate your comments. So thank you. Thank you for those of you who have been commenting. And what else do I want to say? I want to say that you can find Jennie at hiddenpathastrology.com. You can find me at lauriefarrington.com. Follow both of us. We're both active consulting astrologers. We can do consultations for you. We can help you if you're learning astrology. Jennie does a monthly meditation video that you can find here on YouTube as well. That's really great. And I've got a book coming out in the fall, so keep your eyes out for that. Is there anything else you want to mention, Jennie?
Well, just check out both of our schedules for, workshops, talks. Lori's giving a talk coming up. I'm working on a workshop schedule for later on in the year. So we both have a lot going on. So yeah, check out our stuff. Thank you.
Okay,
That's
thank
it.
you. And I'm going to turn this over for you to talk about the cycle of Uranus and Jupiter.
Yeah, so just off the bat here, so again, Lori has mentioned Jupiter, Uranus coming together in Taurus, coming up here on April 20th. This is a cycle that happens roughly every 13, 14 years, where they connect again. So it's not that it's the most unusual cycle. It's certainly something that happens with regularity. But each and every one of them has its own kind of nuances. And we will get more into the specifics of what the meaning of this is. But I do want to give you some examples from history about what these Jupiter-Uranus conjunctions can mean. I mean, essentially, they sort of imply some kind of breakthrough on different levels. So I'm just going to read a couple of things off my list here. I will say I got most of these examples from Cosmos and Psyche, which is Richard Tarnas's wonderful book. If you're interested in the cycles of astrology, I definitely recommend that book. But just really quick here, some of the things that have happened in history during Jupiter-Uranus conjunctions are the Copernican theory of the solar system. In other words, when it was finally laid out that the sun was the center of the solar system, not the Earth. So, wow, what a massive change in consciousness that brought about. So these are the kinds of things that we're talking about with these conjunctions. Um, Lori, do you have anything you want to add about the solar system?
Oh, but no, I don't think so. But one of the ways I want you to think when you're thinking about this is to think about these when these two planets come together, it changes the future. You know,
Yeah.
Uranus is so much about the future, and Jupiter just makes things bigger. So what happens at these conjunctions, and you'll see with these great examples that Jennie has to talk about, is that each one of these things really changed the trajectory of our awareness of the world. So what other examples do you have, Jennie?
Yeah, I mean, they're cool, just breakthrough points, So another one, just, case in point is when the theory of evolution was first published by Darwin and another scientist named Wallace, that was in 1858. And that was right when there was another Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. Now, just to be clear, it's not when the theory was developed. That theory was developed over a couple different decades before that. But when it became public and it burst into public view, was at that time, right during a Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. So, case in point, I mean, talk about changing the scientific view at its core during that one. Um, Another example, this one I really like, is the Statue of Liberty. When the Statue of Liberty was delivered from France to the US, it was right during the 1885-86 Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. It was right in there. And I just think about what a feat to bring that enormous thing across the ocean and then be putting it up in that day and age. But what was really cool about it is France gave it to the US because they wanted to commemorate both revolutions that had happened, in the century before. And it happened, right at this Uranus-Jupiter conjunction. And both of those revolutions happened during Jupiter-Uranus conjunctions. So, that one really kind of symbolizes, you can think about the Statue of Liberty, like representing freedom and liberation, and she's really big, which is what Jupiter does, makes everything big. So that one really kind of just helps you get in your head, like, what are we talking about here? These kinds of things. And then I'll just add a couple others. The other big time frame was in about 1900. Several things happened during the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction in 1900. There was the birth of psychoanalysis was happening at that time. Freud and Jung were very active in that time period. Quantum theory in physics was developed in that time frame. And then the third one I'll bring in, there's tons of others, but the third one is aviation, the Wright brothers launching their airplane. So that just gives you an idea of what some of these things can come about during the Jupiter-Uranus conjunctions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And another thing that I want to say about that is look at your own chart and see that, because this does happen every 13 or 14 years, there are those of you out there that can look at your chart and see, are Jupiter and Uranus conjunct in your chart? And what does that say about your, who you are in the world and how you impact the wider culture, how the wider culture impacts you, how you hold this energy of innovation and sudden big change within you also.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
And part of these cycles, just to jog your mind too, is the last one was January 2011 was when we had Jupiter Uranus together. So that was the last time. So we've, now we're completing that cycle that began in 2011, and we're starting a new one on this date on April 20th. So yeah.
I guess the other thing I want to jump in and say is just look at your chart. Do you have anything right near that 21 degrees of any of the fixed signs? So the fixed signs are Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and am I saying this right? In Aquarius.
Yes.
I all of a sudden got confused. Oh, yes. Okay. So just check your chart. If you have something really close to 21 degrees, this is going to impact you in a much bigger way than if you don't have anything near those degrees. So check on that and think back to that time that Jenny said, what did you say, January 2011?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that was in Pisces?
Yeah, it was in late Pisces. I think it was like 27 Pisces, perhaps. So
that's another thing, look at your chart. Think about 2011. What was going on in the Pisces sector of your chart in 2011 that, a big change that happened there at that time, that now that cycle is complete and a new cycle is beginning.
Yeah. Very important. That natal chart piece is super important. I know we always hammer that point, but it is, because that's how you know if this is going to have more impact than others. However, before we get into anything else, let's talk more about what this means. Like, what does the planet Uranus represent? What does Jupiter represent? What do they represent together? Let's start with Uranus.
Let's start with Uranus. Uranus is such a fascinating chart. And in modern astrology, it's thought of as ruling Aquarius because we use the traditional rulerships. It's still the co-ruler of Aquarius. So there is an echo of Aquarius. Yeah, I don't know if I should have brought that in, but that's there. Uranus really is the planet of awakening, right? That's how I think of it. I have all these images for Uranus. I have the image of you put your fingers in a light socket and everything changes in a heartbeat. Uranus has so much to do with innovation, sudden change, technology, science. What else?
Yeah, I mean, I just think of Uranus as being like radical change, creative breakthroughs. There's a huge theme around liberation, emancipation, just really breaking the bonds of whatever has been holding you back. And it's very, I think of just sudden. I mean, there's a suddenness to it. It's something that just kind of comes into view very quickly. Um, I think other ways to think about Uranus, and we'll get a little bit more into the meaning of Taurus and how that fits in, but other ways I think of it as being, a jackhammer, breaking up the
Mm.
concrete, breaking up the concrete so that new life can grow, grow up from it. It's the plow in the field, breaking the crust of soil to bring nutrients further into the soil and stirring that up so new life can happen. It definitely has that kind of yeah, it's the break apart, things kind of coming apart at the seams, but the purpose is to allow for new things to emerge. So it can be anxiety provoking, but it's also exciting, and there's a fine line, right, between anxiety and excitement. There's a very fine line, and sometimes you can feel both. But that is certainly it, the impulse for freedom, absolutely.
Yeah, if you've got any planets right in that, 20, 21 degrees of the fixed signs, you're feeling that. And I like that you brought in, the two sides, the excitement and the anxiety. If you've got personal planets in those degrees of the fixed signs, you're feeling that a lot. And you might be struggling to sleep at night because there's that, I always feel like when I in my own experience, transits of Uranus feel so much uh like you've got your fingers in a light socket.
Yeah. Zzz. I'm really
And we
shaking things
could
up.
talk about when I had a Uranus transit and got hit by lightning. There was
Mhm.
that.
Yeah.
It
A
is,
real manifestation of it.
yeah. And sometimes astrology is shocking in how just like real and yeah, how
Yeah.
the realities can just fit the symbols so perfectly. But it is so much, it's also that sense of you see something, you can't unsee it. It changes your consciousness. You see something that totally changes how you see the world. And in this in this case, with these two coming together, the changes, like I said earlier, the changes that occur change the future. It's
Mm.
not just a change for this week or this month. These big innovative shifts change the future. Think about aviation.
Yeah.
What, the Wright brothers come along and develop this thing, and look where we are years later.
Yeah.
It, it didn't just change that year or that, yeah, decade even. It changes the future.
Which really brings in the significance of Jupiter. I mean, it's really Jupiter that brings in those pivot points, because Jupiter just makes everything bigger. And I mean, we all talk about that as in the simplest of terms, Jupiter amplifies, magnifies, expands. And so what it's doing is it's taking all those Uranus things that we just described and just blowing them all up into a bigger consciousness. So it really is taking the stage. I mean, again, like that Statue of Liberty is such a good way to think of it. It's like making everything bigger. Um, so I mean, I think that's the key point with Jupiter. There are other ways of seeing Jupiter. Jupiter's considered the great benefic in the more traditional astrology. And yeah, it you can think of it that way. It is always important to consider what benefits it brings, but you don't want to assume that bigger is better. That is not necessarily true. And I definitely don't want to have you walk away thinking like everything bigger is better. That is not the case. It just depends on what's happening. But nonetheless, Jupiter really kind of makes it bigger, essentially.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to address that issue of positivity.
Yeah.
I've listened to read some stuff that other people are talking about this, and there tends to be, because Jupiter's the great benefic, we all want we all want hope in these dark times, right? And we certainly hope for all the benefits that Jupiter can bring in this big shift. However, we can't count on that, can we, Jenny?
No, I mean, it's not, and it's, yeah.
No, Jupiter makes things bigger.
Mhm.
And what you and I think of as a great benefit culturally is not what somebody else is going to think of as a great benefit culturally. So, we really have to be careful in looking at this in a super bright light of, oh my God, the culture is going to just all of a sudden wake up, and, unicorns are going to be running through the fields and the butterflies are going to be flying around. We can all hope for that. But at the same time, bigger can be over extravagance and overdoing things, and can lead us into hubris. Am I saying that right? So there's different ways to look at this, and there's yeah, we have to look at both sides. And what I think would be a great cultural benefit might not be what you think it is.
Yeah, and I just think you just need to understand, hopefully, as you're listening to this, that Jupiter brings abundance, but Jupiter also brings excess. And we can all probably think of examples in either case of the difference between the two. And certainly, on the topic of the negative manifestations, well, there's greed. There's the excess of taking too much. There is when you have too many cells, it's called cancer. So I don't want to, yeah, I just want you to understand that there's an excess piece and there's an abundance piece. And when we look at any of these pictures, whether we're looking at the culture or individual impacts, you can picture that spectrum. And I think everything in astrology is on a spectrum, and is letting you see this array of opportunities. And as individuals, we only have so much control over the different parts of our life. And so when we get to the individual impacts, we talk more about how to meet this challenge, to have impacts in your own life, rather than, oh, the culture is going to do X, Y, and Z to you. That's not our focus. But we also don't want to just pretend like, oh, it's going to be great, because I don't know. There's a lot of crazy things going on in the world right now. And there's a lot of different meanings of what Jupiter-Uranus means together. And there's a lot of different meanings of what it means in Taurus. So
And
that's kind of the next, piece. But
yeah, and I guess I just want to jump in here and say, it should be clear to you by now that neither Jenny or I look at astrology as a, you know, it's not, what's the word I'm looking for?
like,
We're not saying this is going to cause this.
yeah,
In astrology, it doesn't tell us. To me, astrology does not tell me what's going to happen next week or next month. It gives us a range of possibilities. It gives us something to really contemplate deeply and think about and see where we can put our shoulder to the wheel in the direction we are hoping it will go. We know these big changes are going to happen. How they land, exactly what they look like, I don't have a crystal ball to look into. So astrology is not a crystal ball.
yeah. And I mean, I know both of us have our similar and different takes on astrology. And, I mean, I'm a big proponent of our personal growth and like wanting to understand how these things impact you and how to best walk towards the moment to meet it. Like that's the goal here, is to think about how you can meet these moments. So at least from my end, like that's what I'm looking at. But it is a powerful moment in time. Definitely not trying to sow seeds of negativity or necessarily positivity. We're just trying to look at what these symbols suggest, what some of the potentials may be. And what we do know is that Uranus and Jupiter together, they kind of meet each other. They're both high energy planets. So there's a mutual stimulation going on here. They're both expansively kind of buoyant and like lifting things up. And they both together, they bring about this possibility of defying limits, of quantum leaps in consciousness. And that's really exciting. It's a really interesting thing to look at. And so certainly we're looking at, the aspiration towards freedom, the aspiration towards enlightenment, and just, I'm I go right back to like what that Statue of Liberty was supposed to represent. It's just an interesting thing to plant in your mind. So
And the other side of freedom is revolution, and they go together, and there's an awful lot, I think, in this combination that's about the advancement of technology. There's so much in that, and we don't have to look very far. We can see how those changes are happening, but I think it's going to just accelerate so much from this point and
yeah.
go in more directions.
Yeah, breakthroughs in science, breakthroughs in music. I mean, in other cultural areas too, and
And
other
finance
inventions.
and
Yeah,
farming and on and
yeah,
on. Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so do you want to talk more? I mean, we have some examples to show of people who have this in their chart. And we
Yeah.
also need to talk a little bit about Taurus. So
Yeah.
yeah,
What do you want? Let's talk about the examples.
yeah, let's do the examples. Okay.
We've got
So
some of those, right?
Lori and I have just, yeah, Lori and I have just picked a couple examples of people who are born with Uranus Jupiter conjunctions in their chart. We've just picked three, and the idea here is not to take a deep dive on the individual, but to just look at how that conjunction manifests in their life. So we're going to start with, in timely order here, with this guy, Thor Heyerdahl. For those of you who have never heard of them and wonder who the heck he is, he was actually, he's a writer and an explorer. And what he did is he took that myth of Odysseus, the ancient Greek myth of Odysseus, and Odysseus traveled all over really the known world in 10 years, back in antiquity. Now, what Thor Heyerdahl did was said, hey, I want to understand this journey this guy went on, in ancient Greece. And so he assembled a crew and built from scratch the same raft that would have been the mimic of the boat of what Odysseus did, and then floated on this raft with this crew and followed in the tracks of Odysseus. And he did this, in the 20th century. He was born in 1914. And so this is his chart. And all I really want you to see here is the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction in Aquarius in
Wow.
his first house. And just think of the invention, the innovation that's like, I'm going to do this thing, or I'm going to kind of go back to antiquity and mimic this journey, but do it in this totally authentic, revolutionary kind of way.
Oh,
And
wow.
that's what this chart shows.
It's really wild just thinking about in the first house, this is who he is. He's going to just expand this very unusual, what an unusual path to take. That's powerful.
Yeah, and just just to lend a little more credence to the story, is just that his moon is in Taurus, and that conjunction squared his moon. Moon in Taurus represents, the past, like wanting to do things, keeping things the
Mhm.
same. So he wanted to duplicate that journey in exactly the same way, but having to do it just how wacko to be like, it's the 20th century, and I'm gonna build this raft out of, I think it's balsa wood, and to do all that, and then also to have the Mars and Mercury in the mix in Scorpio, the courage to make that journey happen. And I love this chart. I think it's really cool.
That is a very cool chart, and I never heard of him, and I think that's absolutely fascinating.
And he wrote a book about it. It's called The Kon-Tiki.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's that one. The next one we want to share with you is this fella here, Steve Jobs. You might, I'm just going to scoot this over. You might recognize this person. He's the founder of Apple, basically, and he too has the Uranus Jupiter conjunction, this time in Cancer in the 11th house. What do you think of that, Lori?
Well, didn't his big idea change the future, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And having it in the 11th house, it changed the future for many, many people, for the collective. That's pretty powerful. And what was it? I remember looking at this, thinking that opposition to Venus. We talked about that,
We're talking about the
just how his development of the Apple computer was so different than
mm,
PCs were kind of built with the idea of business, and Apples were built with the idea of artists.
Right.
And for many, many years, there was such a separation. Creative people bought Macs and business people bought PCs. I don't know how much that is still true, but it used to be, back in the beginning of these things, that was very, very clear. And I think that's
Yeah.
interesting with the opposition to Venus.
Yeah, exactly. And just thinking about, the creative potential of that Venus, and it's serious, so it's in Capricorn, the business side of it, but it's also really creative. And the packaging really it went into a different direction. The simplicity and elegance of the packaging was a big piece of the whole Apple thing, And so, and his Uranus Jupiter conjunction in the 11th house of groups and community.
Oh my
This one's
God.
in Cancer, so it has of the more kind of a emotional component, which I also think reflects, really, even though packaging is kind of a boring term, but you're really tapping into people's emotions to get them to interested in the product. But it also was a brilliant product
I,
as well. It wasn't just fluff. It wasn't just about that.
I have to say one more thing, and I know
Yeah.
it's just one more thing, that moon in Aries
Mhm.
rules those two planets in Cancer, and that moon in Aries is not making any aspects to anything. And I'm just going to leave it at that because
Yeah, and maybe
I could
not
go
very
down a
many
big
friends in the
rabbit.
workplace.
I could go down a big rabbit hole with that. So, but
Yeah.
that's a
Um,
fascinating chart.
Okay, yeah, there's a lot in that one. But we've got one more to share here, and this one is going to be our a little more modern. Here we have the chart of Simone Biles.
Oh,
She's
that's
awesome.
fascinating.
She's the athlete who's won so many awards for her gymnastics. She's an absolutely groundbreaking
Oh my
individual.
goodness. And look
She,
at that in
yeah.
Aquarius in her third house, the willingness to speak up.
Yep. And just, I mean, this
Wow.
is there's a lot of energy in this chart, and I just think about her, the way she shows up on that mat in her gymnastics and her routines, and there's so much to it, so much effort and creativity in what she's doing. And also, yeah, the third house is your voice, where this is, and it's also the way you move your body. There is a mobility piece in the third house, moving through the environment, that I think is elegantly stated here. And
Right.
also, yeah, well, you want to add to that, Lori?
Yeah, well, I was just thinking about how, her willingness to speak up about her mental health issues. I think that is so clear in that. And the trying to the moon as well. But yeah, there's a lot in that. That would be, did we do an astrobiography about her at one point?
We did, we do. We have that in our echelons there, so
We
you can
should
check that
have
out.
we should have a link to that in the show notes. Let's try to remember to do that
Yeah.
because people might be interested in that. If you don't know, we did a bunch of astrobiographies around famous people at one point a few years ago. Yeah,
It was fun.
yeah, it was.
Yeah, again, much more in this chart, but we will let's digress. And those are our examples of just want to have you see a few people who had this and kind of think about the ways each of them have changed the future in some way, and I think that's the key point. And if you're an interesting person who has this conjunction in your own chart, we'd like to hear about that.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah,
How are you changing the future?
yeah.
What are you doing in a little or big way? What is it that is within you that is really supporting growth and change of the collective?
Yeah.
I think that's beautiful. So we're going to talk about Taurus next. Do you want to take a tiny break before we do that?
Sure.
So Jenny, are you ready to open up the chart and take a look at it?
Yes, let's do it.
All right, let's do it. Here it is. Here's the chart for the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction that occurs on April 20th at 10:27 p.m. in Eastern Time. And there
Hmm.
you have it.
Yeah, so the first thing we want to touch on is the meaning of Taurus itself, because we've talked about Jupiter, we've talked about Uranus, we've talked about them together, but we haven't talked so much about what Taurus brings in. So, Lori, what does Taurus bring in?
Well, Taurus is the fixed earth sign. So there's a lot of stability in Taurus, which is an interesting thing to just think about the stability of Taurus with Uranus and Jupiter having this huge explosion there. It's kind of an interesting thing to think about because Taurus, I always think of Taurus energy as wanting to figure out how it wants to be and then trying to hold on to it and keep it in that position, which clearly there's a little challenge to that with this particular planetary combination happening in that sign.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of things to think about with Taurus. Taurus is ruled by Venus, so there's a lot of Venusian words that you can bring in here around Taurus.
Mhm.
What are you thinking about?
Well, I like, you brought in stability, and I think a lot about Taurus in nature as representing the equilibrium, the stasis of things, how things stay in balance. And one of the things I think about with Taurus is that it provides ballast. It provides like weight and ballast. And if anyone who sails a boat, you know how important ballast is to keeping the boat upright.
Hmm.
So it's something that's kind of overlooked. So you're like, oh, ballast just sits there. But there's something so important about the things that just sit there. And in people, Taurus can really provide a tremendous sense of anchor to everybody around them. They can really offer groundedness, support, the strength of just being steadfast. There's a tremendous amount of loyalty associated with Taurus in holding that space. And I like that you brought Venus up because Venus rules both Libra and Taurus. And so you can think of that in a simple term where Libra kind of represents choices, and then Taurus is the consequence of those choices. So you're dealing with the consequences face of Venus, which I really like to think about.
Oh,
And I think that kind of helps you understand like there's a lot of weight and girth to this sign, even though it represents stillness and silence and just this steady state balance. So I think, you hold that symbol in your mind and then you start, as you say, bringing in, geez, what has Uranus been doing in Taurus? And I think the picture that comes to mind is the plow. You can think of Uranus plowing up the stability of Taurus to churn up the soil to allow for new growth.
yeah.
And that's the way you can kind of bring them together, the awakening of new growth, when you see Uranus as the plow. And then when you throw Jupiter in, you just bring this moment of time that just blows this picture up into public view, blows us up into a much bigger way where we are needing to reckon with that idea of Uranus churning up the dirt here and all the different implications of that, both new soil and like earthquakes.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
as you were talking about the soil being churned up, I'm thinking, well, yeah, there's the lightning bolt that just went through the tree and knocked over the earth in that area. I mean, there's a lot of images that you can bring in to bring these two together. Taurus is also talked about as being really stubborn. I love the issue of, yeah, loyalty and stability around Taurus is so important. It is a fixed sign. It doesn't like to change, but obviously, anyone with a strong Taurus component in their chart really needs to be looking at where exactly that Taurus component is. Uh,
Mhm.
if it's anywhere before 21 degrees, it's already in these past few years, it's already been churned up with Uranus. And if it's in those very last degrees, it's about to be. And if you've got a strong Taurus statement right around that 21 degrees, you are going to be feeling this particular conjunction very, very strongly.
Mm,
And
mhm.
you're going to want to think back to other times that these planets have been interacting with the planets that you have at that degree.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I think so on a mundane level, you can think about Taurus as representing our resources, our money in the world, the financial situation of the world, the food systems of the world, things like ore that you are mining out of the earth, all of those tangible physical resources can be thought of as Taurus. And I'm sure
Earth
all of us can
itself.
think of multiple examples of how these big topics have gotten churned up in the public eye, but also in our own personal lives. So I think, on the mundane level, I kind of think about those topics. I think about environmentalism and the earth, and how we are in a time of coming into new relationship with the earth, recognizing how important the stability and the equilibrium of earth is for all of our needs to be met. That is coming into stark focus. We can see that all around us. Doesn't matter whatever your opinion is. Just as far as politics, just open up your eyes and pay attention to what's going on. Think about your backyard. What has changed in your town, your state, your country. And then on a secondary level, I think Taurus really refers to our bodies. And one thing that's really come up, I would say probably, especially since Uranus has been in Taurus, has been all this stuff about somatic wisdom, all this understanding of how emotions and traumas and our stories live in our bodies. I think that that's another huge meaning. This type of thinking is infiltrating psychoanalysis. It's infiltrating all of the kind of health and wellness fields, which I'm greatly interested in. And it's powerful information. It is powerful. And so I think that this is also, we can think about this as a wake-up call individually about what is going on in our physical bodies. What is the wisdom of our body telling us at this time?
Yeah. And the other thing, with Uranus, you want to remember that Uranus has so much to do with technology. And you think about the technological advances that are happening at this point in time around things like our bodies, like healthcare, the technologies that are happening in healthcare, the technologies that are being brought to bear on our money systems and on our, the problems of the planet really require this awakening right now. And technology could certainly be used in amazing ways to heal some of the problems in all of those areas, if we can get out of our own ways and use technology and money, which is another big thing of Taurus. If we can use those things to create positive change, which we really want to think of this Uranus-Jupiter conjunction as a positive change. We really want to put our energy into seeing it that way and be doing what we can to drive it in that direction. Jupiter really wants this to be a wake-up call that benefits the earth, our bodies, our food systems, our medical systems, all of those things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think part of, our focus, Lori's, my focus is definitely to encourage you. And I think we've already said this, but to go out and meet the challenge of this, to go out and ask yourself, where do you want to wake up and go big? Where do you want to make a shift in your life? How do you want to open up your perspective? Which is what I think Uranus and Jupiter bring together, is opening up your perspective to something new and different and a new way of looking at things. It's not to say everything is perfect and everything's going to be all great. That's not the point. The point is, how do we, each of us as individuals, align our energy to meet these challenges of the times? And that, I think that's a really nice way to think about it. So
As you're saying that, it just, I think about my boyfriend who has a big Taurus component. And whenever I get in a little tizzy about, the world and what's going on, he just looks at me and so calmly, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. But the Uranus Jupiter hasn't quite hit him yet. At any rate,
yeah.
I
Okay.
think we want to think about now, in looking at the whole picture of this chart, is okay, this conjunction is happening in Taurus. Taurus is ruled by Venus. What's Venus up to? So here's Venus right there with Chiron. Mercury's retrograde. There's all of this stuff going on in Aries, including that Venus. So what kind of information does that give us?
There's a lot of information here.
A
Yeah,
lot of
this is
information here.
Yeah, and I mean, I know, I really like the rulership stuff, and I know you and I like to bring that in. It's great. And Venus, yeah, it's almost like Jupiter and Uranus are looking to Venus, going, "Hey, Venus, yo, what do we do? How do we do this? How do we wake up? What's going on?" And Venus is not only at Aries in Aries at 19 degrees, it's occupying exactly the same degree as the solar eclipse that happened on April 8th, just 12 days before this. So that really says that this huge breakthrough that has to do with Uranus and Jupiter is very much a part of the eclipse cycle, with that massive a solar eclipse, totally visible across the United States. And I just think that that's really interesting. But Venus occupying this is Venus is making a statement about something we're already learning about, something that's already being woken up inside of you that has to do with you shifting your values, like being bold and courageous, taking advantage of the Aries energy to shift your values, and the way you appreciate yourself and all the things around you is what the Venus brings in. So that's kind of one of the methods we're looking at, is doing those Venus and Aries things to address the awakening.
It is really fascinating to think about the ruler of those two planets being right there on that point of the eclipse. It really does tie those stories so tightly together, thinking of the eclipse as that pivot point. Well, okay, here we are a very short time later looking at this. Okay, what's pivoting? What's pivoting here? Well, this Uranus Jupiter is certainly helping support the pivot that the eclipse was pushing us toward,
Yeah. And
right?
yeah, we will have that eclipse video too, so check that out. But
Yeah.
in a nutshell, you can't look at all that Aries stuff without thinking, what is the message? What needs to be healed about Aries energy? What is the message? Mercury's there. What needs to be healed? Chiron's there. And then Venus is sort of bringing in this like internal, more just, I don't know, like, for lack of a better word, like feminine principle into this sign of Aries. And then the North Node there is saying, hey, folks, we need a new direction about how we use Aries energy. And I keep just seeing that theme echoed over and over again. And the fact that the ruling planet of this change is in this sign at this moment, right on that eclipse sign, is really saying, we really all need to address this lack of balance inside of ourselves, to
Right.
address how
Yeah.
we use our energy, how we use force, how we use the things that we have decided are part of masculine energy in the society.
Yeah,
Um,
and really face
yeah,
the reality of what that wound costs us. With Chiron
yeah,
right there, it's like, what does the wounded energy of aggression, what is it costing us as a
yeah.
people? And it's really interesting. And I'm really curious about to hear you talk about this, Jenny, is, that we then look at the ruler of Venus in Aries, which is going to bring us to Mars being in Pisces. And
Mhm,
it doesn't stop there, because then, and maybe this is crazy to be bringing all of this rulership up, but this ties these all together. Mars is, whoops, that's not the what I wanted. But Mars is in a sextile aspect to that, and Venus is at the midpoint. So it creates this little combination between Pisces and Aries and Taurus, with
mhm,
this big wake up energy, wake up to the cost of aggression in our culture, in our world. And then
mhm,
what is Mars saying? Mars is really in an interesting position here between Saturn and Neptune. And
mhm,
in Pisces, Mars would rather be in Aries, but it's in Pisces. So it's being slowed down. It's being put in a position where it has to steady itself, quiet itself down with that Saturn, and see itself from a very different perspective with Neptune involved as well.
mhm. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because you're saying the cost of the Aries. Well, you can think of that as the cost of take, of going out and taking and, just making all these decisions without a regard for the consequences, which is really what you're saying. And so then to go say, all right, well, that's what we're dealing with. And then to have Mars be in Pisces, I mean, that is such a statement about that, of finding a balance, of moving out of that extremely self-centered take place and into this, oh no, we're all living in one system here. This is one system. This is one round planet that's a total system. And so it's saying, no, you really have to address the idea that you are not a singular entity living in a vacuum, doing all your own individual things with no impacts. It's saying, nope, everything you do matters. Everything that every thread you weave is part of that much bigger tapestry. And Mars, you're right, Mars is not comfortable here. It's kind of besieged by, I really like that word, but
I
that
do
besieged,
too.
between Saturn and Neptune. So it's kind of stuck between the reality and an ideal,
Mm.
is where Mars is kind of going, I'm not sure. And the truth is we have to bring those together, right? We have to bring together the ideal, that what we're trying to do, the healing that needs to happen, but it has to be tangible and approachable and pragmatic. That's what Saturn's making a statement about. So it's kind of saying that's a hard place for Mars in Pisces to meet. That's kind of brings the challenge. But the saving grace is that it's in a sextile. It's in a sextile with Jupiter. So quite honestly, this is just giving us a pathway. This is a pathway of what to do with all that hot, aggravated energy, how to anchor it in a much bigger viewpoint that includes the sensitivity and the suffering and the compassion that's needed for the whole picture, and then tying that right back into this wake up moment that's in Taurus, that's in our bodies, that's living in our environment. It's quite a powerful picture.
And I kind of love that Venus in Aries. It's like, I'm going to have the courage and the audacity to change this.
Mhm.
There's, I just love that.
Yeah, I mean, I do think Venus brings in the rather than being like, oh no, it's terrible, we've been doing these terrible things with Aries all this time. That's not really, we've been showing the terrible face of the selfish take of Aries, but there's also a beauty in Aries, the beauty of being like, oh, I'm an independent voice here, I'm an independent being, and I can like loan my energy to that bigger picture, and it matters, and that really is what Venus, I think, brings in, is it's worth something. Venus brings in our worth. So it's worth something, it's worth a lot. So I like that. That's how I like that positive spin on it, because that's really what it's asking us to do.
Yeah, it's just so interesting how everything is gathered in this little spot. And at this moment on April 20th, one of the things that we haven't talked about is the fact that, and I don't know exactly how relevant this is or what, but the fact that the sun just the day before this has entered Taurus, and it's
Mhm.
making a tough square. Pluto's making a tough square to that. I think I just want to drop that in there as a yeah, kind of a cautionary tale. There's a lot that's really positive here, but we don't want to forget that these are incredibly powerful times that we really have to keep our eyes open and pay attention to, power dynamics at work that are pulling us away from some of the work that we really need to do.
Yeah, I just think that what that does, knowing the sun is in Aries, I'm sorry, Taurus, it locates us in Taurus season, and we'll also have our Taurus season video up for this too. So or in a little bit. And so you can look at that, but that really helps you understand that this is the Taurus part of your life that's also being really lit up from a sun perspective, like the sun making that statement as well. And then the fact that it's squaring Pluto is just, it's saying, there's no escaping the inevitable transformation that must happen. There's no escaping it. And so the best use of this is to release like resistance to the fact that it's going to be changed. That doesn't mean just roll over and give up. That doesn't mean that at all. It just means try to find the ways to move with what's happening rather than fighting against, because fighting against is not going to help at all. You know, and again, it doesn't mean roll over, just give up. It means stand your ground, in fact, and really look with a problem solving mindset. And that's how I interpret it. Not easy.
And I think also, you know, as far as in looking at your own chart and how this is impacting your own chart, it would probably be good also to go back and re-listen if you've listened to it before or listened to it for the first time, the video we did about Pluto entering Aquarius. Because this, you know, in your personal story, the sun squaring that Pluto is going to bring up, it's going to bring forth more of that change that's happening wherever Aquarius is in your life.
Mm, yeah,
There's all of that.
agreed. Wow. Okay. I mean, what do you think? Think we've covered that
I
reasonably
think
well?
so. And I think we're gonna go on and we're gonna talk about each individual chart, and we're gonna really focus on these three areas of your life. So we're gonna close this up here and move forward. So let's go to folks with Aries rising.
Oh my goodness. Okay, Aries rising. So, as Laurie just mentioned, you will notice that we are including three different areas of life here, three different houses. And that's because that's where all the activity is. So let's just start with the fact that that Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, for those of you that Aries rising is landing right in your second house. So right away, this cues you to topics of money, resources, the way that you value yourself. It also can represent energy reserves. You know, these are all the areas where there's some kind of big change that's happening with this Uranus-Jupiter situation. So when you add in these other two houses, I mean, what the first thing you need to understand, Aries rising, is this is very much about you, your identity. The first house where Venus is represents you, the self, and just what you're developing here is self-awareness about yourself as an Aries person, as a courageous, leaderly, determined type of person, as your overall life direction. And then when you bring in the Mars piece, what is being asked of you is that you have to take action on kind of digging around in your subconscious patterns that are also part of your identity. And this lends itself to the way you think about yourself in the collective, in the whole big group of everybody. And then it brings in that very personal focus of Venus and Aries, and then the big change that's really happening in the way that you see yourself, the way you value yourself, and what you have to offer other people. So in a nutshell, the three things together really bring you to this place of you are undergoing a fundamental change in your identity and how you move in the world. And it really does include those deep seated behind the scenes patterns that you can really only get at if you're willing to kind of surrender to some kind of help, some kind of support. Perhaps it's therapy, perhaps it's making sure you go on a retreat at some point, that you take enough time in solitude so you can kind of dig around and understand what's going on here. So that's how I kind of see this with these two areas in play.
It's interesting to think about these three together, and you know, the big change happening in that area of how you value yourself and your money. But a lot of work has gone on behind the scenes to bring this about, to bring this change about. I feel like, you know, for those of you with Aries rising, there's a lot of work and effort that you've been undergoing for a while now around you know, your own understanding of your internal hidden processes. So there's a lot of work going on in that area. And then where Venus is, your first house, your personality, you are really developing the courage to show up as you are. It's sort of like, I feel like those two are working in tandem to create the ground for this big, we hope, very positive change in your financial situation or your own understanding of your own self-worth. If
Yeah.
I had Aries rising, I'm sorry, I don't ever say this kind of thing, but I have to say it. I'd buy a lottery ticket.
Yeah.
I'd buy a lot of them going up to this point, and I never do those things. But
Yeah. Go.
Jupiter-Uranus, something very sudden and uh,
Hmm.
yeah, a very sudden occurrence could happen in your life that really impacts you on that level of finances and self-worth.
Yeah. And one thing I just want to add is that you covered, I think we've covered most of the things, but it's just, I really want to get across the idea that there has been some kind of pivot in your fundamental viewing of yourself because of all the Aries activity and the solar eclipse in Aries. There's a pivot here. So maybe you had, a certain viewpoint about what it meant to have courage and move about the world with courage, and that you've recently come to understand that courage actually means something different. For example, it may be that you're showing up with a willingness to be more vulnerable than you ever have. That would be an example of having a whole new view of courage where you're like, oh, okay, something different. And I love, Laurie, how you said, there's something about the way you're developing courage in this area. And that's what it's about. It's about that change in values that has allowed you to go, oh, it means something different than I thought. And that is what the key piece is
Yeah.
to allowing this massive shift in the way you value yourself or in your financial situation or the way you use money.
Yeah.
So just want to throw that in.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. So let's move on now to folks who have Taurus rising. If you've got Taurus rising, this big change that's represented by this Jupiter-Uranus conjunction is so very personal to you because it is happening right there in your first house. As you can see, if you didn't listen to all the previous part of this video, we've highlighted 3 different areas here because they are very much working together. And we want to think about all 3 of them as a unit. The big change is happening in that first house of your personality, how you show up in the world. But in order to kind of look at the whole picture, we want to think about, first of all, let's think about the 12th house. The 12th house represents what's going on within our own unconscious, our understanding of our subconscious nature, our patterns, internal patterns. There's something that has occurred there. There's a big shift, a pivot point there with the eclipse. And so, yeah, there's a lot of learning to courageously face your internal demons, I think, for those of you with Taurus rising. And we want to look at Mars also, because these all 3 are working together right now. Mars in the 11th house, the 11th house being the area where you really receive support from the larger community. You've been learning a lot in this area for the past year or so. There's been a lot of learning in that area. If you take that learning and allow it to support, allow the learning and the community involved to support this kind of courageous, deep understanding of yourself. It's like those things are what kind of add up together and allow you to really work with this big change within your personality. You could really, yeah, some big shift in how you show up in the world, how you authentically are willing to walk into the world is occurring on the backdrop of what's happening in those other 2 houses.
Nice. Yeah, you can think of this, those of you with Taurus rising, you can think of this as a very interesting intersection of the first house, your most personal house. It's all about you, but also the most powerful house in the house system, and how that is intersecting with these massive collective pictures. So this is very much about, this is a real potential here for you to have a great deal of impact on the collective and on your community. That's really with that 12th house and the 11th house involved, but it's contingent on your ability to learn more empathy, more compassion, how to be kinder, how to have sensitivity towards people through what you see in your community, and really take that in, and then also recognize how your community has got you when you're suffering or struggling, like they support you. And that's part of the Pisces part of what you have to learn through that Mars lens in the 11th house. So that's kind of that personal intersection. And then, just as Laurie said, like having to I like how you said face your internal demons. Like, yes, you've got to find a way to take your power, but for good, in a positive way, in a way that doesn't have to be, sort of closed down and selfish, but is more open. It's fierce and it's courageous, but there's more of an openness to it that allows for this bigger shift to happen. And then that is how, that's basically the pathway to really allowing this electrical socket or this earthquake to kind of shake up something about your core identity as a Taurus person, and just let in this new growth, let in this new way of being. And I can think of a couple people with this, and it is powerful.
Yeah.
My sister has this, so I'm thinking about her a lot with this.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's a big change, and you don't be surprised. You are going to be impacting people with your personality, with how you show up in the world. You're going to be impacting people in a very different manner, I think, in this coming period of time. So embrace that, allow the change. We can't, a Taurus rising, you might wish the things would not change, but
Too
yeah,
bad.
yeah. The one thing that we all know is going to happen in our lives and around us is change. So embrace that. Now we're going to move on to folks who have Gemini rising.
So for those of you with Gemini rising, this is an interesting one. With Gemini rising, you tend towards being a pretty curious person, and can move around in the world in a pretty easy way. And what I think is fascinating is that this particular series of events, you notice that we've included 3 different houses here because the whole thing's working together. With Mars and Venus and the conjunction that's happening, they're all working together. And for those of you with Gemini rising, this just isn't really very personal. This is more about your ability on a big level to have an impact on the bigger picture, on groups, on whoever you work with in your professional life or whoever you interact with in the most public kind of way, your groups, your community. And then also, this kind of powerful place behind the scenes that really refers to your own unconscious, but also the collective consciousness. So in a lot of ways for Gemini rising, like this is a very interesting moment of maybe seeing the fruits of some of your labors in other parts of your life showing up kind of in this bigger impactful way. The conjunction itself is falling in your 12th house. So that's a behind the scenes sort of shift. Again, I know we talk about this as both your kind of hidden behind the scenes patterns, but also there's a lot of mysteriousness to the 12th house. It also refers to a deeper sense of spirituality, the way that you see the world and the cosmos, and what you see as the kind of a way to transcend just ordinary life. So there's a big shift coming here in the way that you're interacting with that big picture. At the same time, you've got Venus in Aries in that 11th house. So that really symbolizes a new way of being in groups, a new way of perhaps being a leader, or showing some kind of determination or courage in a new way in front of people, in front of a community that maybe previously you just didn't think was possible. And and now you're finding a way to challenge those limits. And then you throw the Mars in the picture, which is nicely sextiling that conjunction in the 12th house. And Mars is making a statement about what you're doing in your most public space of life. So for a lot of us, that's going to be our profession, whatever is our daily job that we spend a huge chunk of our time at. It can be other topics that are also similarly public. But essentially, this is a place where you are having to kind of come to grips with how you want to handle this, like being brave with that Mars there, and also really letting in. I think of this as opening, the irony of Mars being in Pisces, like opening to recognizing sensitivities of others, a need to be more compassionate or empathetic, or just more considerate in general in your workplace, to recognize that there's more needs than just whatever yours are. So there's some way that you're opening this portal to a new way of embracing these much bigger forces than just you. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's really interesting thinking about this, and thinking about that Mars moving through the 10th house for folks with Gemini rising. to me, there's, yeah, I mean, Pisces brings in so much the need for compassion. And, this might be a need to be compassionate about your own, where you're at with your social reputation or your career as well. It might be bringing compassion into your career or bringing compassion to yourself for where you find yourself. Um, However you want to look at that. But the big change, the big Jupiter-Uranus wake up is happening. Yeah, like you said, Jenny, it's happening way behind the scenes. It's happening in your unconscious. There's something that is breaking open within your understanding of who you are and how you connect with all of life, all of humanity. And in order to, kind of in order to really take advantage of that explosive positive change, I think bringing that compassion to yourself or to your career space, really bringing that compassion. You've been working hard on that area for quite a while now, bringing that compassion and then filtering that through bringing a more courageous approach to the communities you find yourself in or the development of community. All of those work together to support the really positive expansion of this internal wake-up call that, make no mistake, if there is a huge wake up, shake up within your unconscious, it's going to change every aspect of your life. Those things in the 12th house, they may seem invisible because they are behind the scenes. And the people in your life might not have a clue this big shift that is happening, but it's happening and it's going to change every aspect of your life ultimately.
Yeah, the key word I'm getting for this one, or key words, is just there's some kind of major liberation in the way that you kind of view your small self in this bigger picture. And I just yeah, I just see something. I almost just see like a bird coming out of a cage with this somehow. That's just, coming through. So anyway,
I
just share
like that.
a little
When you
imagery.
said a bird coming out of a cage, I just think,
Yeah.
I think of that 12th house too. It's like it's where you're quiet, it's where you're alone, it's where you're silent.
Mm.
So you think of somebody, I don't know, what I heard, what I envisioned when you said that about the bird, I just envisioned someone out in the woods and a bird, like, I don't know.
Yeah, like a grouse.
Yeah, exactly. Like something,
Yeah.
boom. But there's that internal sudden wake up call. It's really a beautiful opportunity. So let's move on to folks who have Cancer rising. If you've got Cancer rising, well, first of all, you come into the world, you've got this, just level of sensitivity. People with Cancer rising just show up in such a nurturing manner with their personality. Now, you want to think about, you can see how we have highlighted 3 houses instead of just one. The big shift, the big wake up call of this Uranus Jupiter expansive issue with the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction is happening in your 11th house. So you want to look and think about what is happening in this area of your life. The 11th house is, we talk about it as community. It's the kind of I think of it as like-minded people who gather together for a common cause. We can think of this type of community as the community that supports us. It's where we receive support from others for our development. It may include friends, but it's not necessarily friends. It's just like-minded people. So think about, what is community to you? Who is in that bucket called community in your life if you've got Cancer rising? And how can you imagine a big, unexpected change happening. And I love saying that. How can you expect it? And one of the great things about Uranus is don't try to expect it because it'll be different than what you think. But at any rate, there's a big change brewing here. You might already know what it is. But we want to also think about these other situations that are going on in the ninth and 10th house. These planets in transit right now are all linked together and they're working together. So we can think about it. This big change happening in your community. It's kind of coming off the back of the eclipse. We talked about that. The eclipse happened here in Aries, right at the point where Venus is right now. So it's all connected. And in this area, which for you with Cancer rising, this is the 10th house. There is a lot of development for you. There's a lot that you are kind of, there's a pivot here with the eclipse. There's a pivot for you to really take on your career or your social reputation in a much more courageous manner than you might expect yourself to. At any rate, there's a lot of development of courage in that area of your career. And that is also linked to this growth and development that has been going on in your ninth house, which is really related to your worldview, your greater understanding of the world, which you kind of if you've got Cancer rising, you sort of show up with a bit of an idealistic view of what your worldview is. That has been undergoing a lot of development and maturing over the past year or so. And these three are all linked together. So you want to think about your worldview, the development that's been going on regarding your worldview, the audacity and courage that you're taking on in your career, and how those are supporting the most positive expression of this big shift and change and awakening in your community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so those of you with Cancer rising, the big takeaway here is this is happening in a very public place. The ninth, the 10th, and the 11th houses together are very public. And they're also three of the most like positive and effective houses kind of brought together. Like the ninth and the 11th houses are considered to be fairly beneficial places, and the 10th house is an angular house, so it's potent. It's got some power to it. So this is a public shift for you. So whatever other work you've been doing, personal work in your life, and so on and so forth, well, now it's kind of coming into this place where that work is going to become evident in a new way, and with that awakening that's happening in your community. And as Laurie says, like, community is interesting because it definitely can have to do with an extension of your profession. It can be your cohorts, your like-minded alliances, and so on. It doesn't have to be, but it's interesting to think about these places working together, because that ninth house, on the other hand, is kind of like the education you received to expand yourself enough to take on the career or the professional focus that you have. And then that 11th house shows you kind of the bigger impact of like how that impacts the greater community, whatever your role is. So that's where this whole, business is happening, this big shift kind of centered on as Laurie said, the pivot that has happened due to the eclipse in your 10th house, and the way that you're standing your ground in a new way. Like something's different. Like maybe you thought that courage meant one set of things, and you were trying to do it a certain way. And then at that eclipse, you kind of went, you know what? That might actually just be something different than what I thought, and there's some other way that, maybe just standing here and holding my ground in this spot is a definition of courage I hadn't quite thought about in that way, and being willing to show up in public in the full view of everybody else, in a different way that includes your heart on your sleeve, and certainly with Mars going through Pisces, and of course we've had Saturn there for a while. Yes, definitely some kind of education I like how you use the word kind of the maturing, like there's a necessary maturing of whatever your perspective is. And that ninth house, it represents the experiences you gather, the travels that you go on, the teachers that you encounter. So that's very active right now. So, I don't know. I just think this is a really interesting time for those folks with Cancer rising. So I hope it's true because that's me. So, but I do see it. I do feel some of this happening. So, anyway,
Yeah, so
yeah.
what's the big shakeup in your community, Jenny?
Well, I really feel like it is to do with my career, but I do think on a fun level, what I'm recognizing is that all of us have different communities and they have different roles in our life. And I have one community I'm thinking of where I've kind of expected them to be like the more serious kind of community, and I'm finally realizing they're the community to go have fun with. So I'm going to go have fun with them, and I have filled out brackets for March Madness this year for the basketball tournament, which I never do.
Huh,
And that's how I'm going to have more fun with my community coming up and just enjoy it. So that's my little
that's awesome.
fun little side note.
That's wonderful. I think that that's a great place to have this conjunction happening. I mean, it can just like really open up the floodgates on community that will support you. And if
Mhm.
it's, yeah, if there's been a pivot made at that eclipse, a pivot of courage and audacity and bringing that into your career, allowing the community to that supports you to kind of explode with this big shift and change. That's a beautiful thing. That's
Mhm.
great. I look forward to hearing how it all plays out for you. And if you are listening and have Cancer rising, leave us a note below. Okay,
Yes.
now
All
we're
right.
going to move on to folks who have Leo rising.
Yeah, so Leo rising. Let's just start with the fact that you may notice the three houses here. That's because Lori and I have decided, well, really the astrology has decided that these parts are really working well together. And you can't really think about that conjunction without considering the other two pieces because they kind of show you where the rubber meets the road. Like where's the action that you've been taking in your personal life? So those of you with Leo rising, this also, like the one before it, is pretty public. These three houses are, very visible houses. Well, I say that with a little bit of exaggeration. I'll explain in a minute. Let's hone in on the fact that the big change is happening in your 10th house. So Uranus and Jupiter are there together, shaking something up in your 10th house. The 10th house is the most visible house, the most public house. So for a lot of folks, that's going to refer to their profession. It also can refer to the way you could possibly be a parent, and you're showing up as a parent in the public role. You also there's other ways to be showing up in public. So just think about whatever that is in your own life. And with Leo rising, I'm sure you're doing it with some flair because Leo's likes to be out there. So that's kind of where the big shift is. You also must look at where Venus is. Again, Venus is in Aries. It's exactly at that same point where the solar eclipse took place. So there's some sort of change, some kind of major pivot in the way that you're approaching this. The ninth house has to do with travel. It has to do with higher education. And overall, it's the way you expand yourself. You expand your perspective and your wisdom through learning from other people, from learning through experiences that you have. So there's something new that has caused you to change. I mean, it could be something like you did this big trip and you went to a totally foreign country you've never been to before and you've learned something really new and you had to be brave there because maybe you didn't speak the language at all. You couldn't even recognize the characters on the signs. That's just an example of the type of experience where you may have had to step up and discovered something new and exciting about yourself that you just didn't even know. And meanwhile, let's talk about the eighth house because that's the place where I'm like, that was not as obvious to the public eye. And I kind of said that wrong a little bit in the beginning because the eighth house is actually pretty hidden. There often can be secrets in the eighth house and these things that are tucked away out of view. And in the simplest of terms, the eighth house is where you just start bumping up against other people's stuff. Your emotional baggage bumps up against someone else's emotional baggage. And that's when, relationships really get interesting and relationships really start to, you find out if they're worth something because the way that you manage conflict, the way that you figure out how to set boundaries to manage issues and conflicts is so important to your ability to, seize the day in your profession and be willing to, let this massive change happen where the conjunction's going on. So Mars is teaching you a lot about that. You've also had Saturn in that eighth house for a long time. And so there's been a lot of lessons around how you set boundaries, what kind of boundaries, how do you protect your sensitivity with Pisces here? How do you allow for the sensitivities of others to come forwards and be able to hold healing space for those things without getting caught up in other people's stuff yourself? Those are some of the issues that you're having to address. So I mean, just for example, like if you were suddenly deciding you wanted to be a therapist for your career, you could easily see how learning how to draw these boundaries would loan itself to that. Just to give you a simple example. But anyway, I digress.
Yeah, it's really interesting to think of these all together as a unit. And in case those of you who didn't listen to the beginning part, the reason we're really bringing these together is that they are working together because Venus rules the sign that Uranus and Jupiter are in, and Mars rules Venus. And yeah, so they all come together. Jupiter and Mars, anyway, they all come together in that rulership storyline. So you can think of the efforts that have been being made with Saturn also moving through Pisces over the past year. You've been learning a lot about how to navigate other people's issues, how to set boundaries, how to understand how to work with other people's deep issues. So there's been a lot of learning there, and that really contributes to the storyline of where we are now. The eclipse that happened back on the 8th of the month, which right at the same point, I think Jennie already said this, but I'm repeating it, right at the same point where Venus is right now, this is an area where you've taken a pivot. So you're learning about how to set boundaries. You're pivoting your learning, your education, how you're understanding the world. You're really taking on the courage of your own experience and your own, you're taking on a worldview that is very deliberate to yourself. And these things are really contributing to your ability to allow this big change in your career to be really a positive thing. I think, allowing these three areas to work together, really understanding how they work together and working with them that way is really going to support the more positive expression of this big change in your career. And, that could look so many different ways. Obviously, it could look many different ways. Maybe you suddenly get a new job that was unexpected. Maybe you suddenly lose a job and that was unexpected. Well, one of the things with Jupiter, I guess what I would say in that case is, you need to be out of there. If you lose your job at this point, there's really no question in my mind that it has played out its course in your life, and it's time to allow that big change. So, you're really at a point where that career path, vocational path, or simply your social reputation, you might not have a traditional career, but we all have a reputation, and there's a big shift that's just about to pivot in that area.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Yeah, something about embracing the change of your worldview,
Right.
something different.
Whatever
Yeah.
it is,
Yeah.
just embrace it. I think that's, on a personal
Yeah.
level, this big change, we need to embrace it. And it might not look all that embraceable to begin with. I mean, it might
Yeah.
be challenging to embrace it, but as
Yeah.
much as you can, I think that's definitely the way to go.
That's
Okay.
just, yeah, I like how Venus brings in that appreciation for yourself, like the appreciation of being brave. Like anyway, this adds a
Hmm.
ruling planet of that. So, all
Yeah.
right.
I'm glad you said that, actually.
Yeah.
The appreciation of being brave, the taking action on being sensitive. With
Yeah.
Venus in Aries and Mars in Pisces, there's both of those, the appreciation of bravery and courage, and the ability to take action on being more sensitive and vulnerable, allowing that as well. Okay. So let's move
Mm-hmm.
on to folks who have Virgo rising. Now, if you've got Virgo rising, first of all, let's address the fact that we've got 3 houses that are highlighted here. And just to explain why we've done that, Jenny and I have talked a lot about this and really seen how this the way these planets are set up right now really links these 3 houses together. We've got Venus in rulership of Taurus, which is where the Jupiter and Uranus are, and then Mars is ruling Venus, and Jupiter is ruling Mars. At any rate, these 4 planets, 3 houses, 3 signs, are all brought together in a way that is very complementary and very, it kind of tells a little bit of a story. And we can think about it. Venus is right at the point that the eclipse happened a few weeks ago. And that is really suggesting that a pivot has been made in that area of your life. A pivot is happening, a way of really moving toward a more courageous bravery within this 8th house. The 8th house is where we bump into other people's issues, other people's baggage. It's an area that can be really tricky to navigate. It's an area where we develop the boundaries that we set. So this is really very much, the pivot has been around really developing and understanding the boundaries that you need to set in your life. And that we also, over the course of the past year, we have been really learning a lot about who we are in relationship, what we need in relationship. These things are working together. You can think about learning about how to be in relationship and then courageously setting boundaries, and all of this kind of supporting this big, massive, exciting, possibly stressful change in your worldview. What does a change in your worldview look like? It could look many ways. It could look like, the 9th house is, I say worldview, but it's all the things that we develop our worldview out of. So it's our education, it's travel. This big change could be around travel. It could be around the stress and excitement of going on a big trip somewhere, or the stress and excitement of education, going back to school, learning a whole new way to view the world. There's many ways that this could be creating this big change in your life. But watch for it. Watch for how these 3 things are working together to really support that big shift and change.
Nice. Yeah, you know what's really interesting to me about this is I'm just trying to kind of summarize the impacts of these things in one chunk. And like with Virgo rising, the 7th, 8th, and 9th houses, they all very much have to do with your relationships. And what they have to do with is not the personal, not so much your personal play into these relationships, but more about how you play with these these relationships in public, I guess is what I wanted to say, because everything's above the horizon here. So we're dealing with houses that are above the horizon. So by definition, those are more kind of outward, dealing with the public type of houses. So in a nutshell, what this represents for a Virgo rising person is to just have a whole different way of relating, in a way that you're seen by society. I see the big change in the 9th house, as possibly the way that you show up as a teacher to other people. You may have not been a teacher, or maybe you've been a teacher in a certain way, but now there's a new way. There's a new thing cracking open for you that is about this ability to teach and share wisdom with others, and part of that has to do very much with the new things you've learned, the new development of courage you've had in how you set boundaries with others. Perhaps you found a way to temper that. Maybe before you were setting boundaries that are too hot and too fast, and you needed to turn it down, or maybe you weren't setting boundaries enough. That depends on how you're handling that Aries energy. But nonetheless, there's been a pivot in the way that you handle that area of your life. And, it's something that you can do with more confidence. So, that's kind of what that represents, and then I very much think the Mars piece and the Pisces piece, you've already kind of talked about this, but what you've learned from those one-on-one partnerships, like what you've learned about managing the sensitivities of the partner, or maybe your own sensitivities that you bring to the partnership, but just learning how to handle those in a new way, and how to take action on that sensitivity to manage your partnerships better. And that's all just teaching you, showing you the way to be this teacher that you potentially could be showing up with that pivot point. And it's certainly not the only way, but there's definitely something about just sharing of your wisdom, the expressing of yourself. That ninth house is about how you express yourself in that very public way. So there's something new afoot, but you get to learn it through these kind of banters in your partnership, and these understanding of how to find a new way to set boundaries that are both compassionate, but also keep your sense of self intact, so you're
Hmm.
not giving too much of yourself up. So yeah.
That's great.
Mhm.
That's great. Okay. Okay, now let's move to Libra rising.
All right, so those of you with Libra rising, well, wow, this is quite a statement. This one's kind of straightforward in a way to me. So let's just start with the simple fact that we have included 3 different houses on these charts for each and every sign, and that is just because they're intimately related. These 3 parts of life right now, these 3 parts of life are being lit up, and because we're human beings and all these things work in a process, we're in a process. So for those of you with Libra rising, um, the other thing I'll just mention too, as a Libra rising person, you walk around with this ability to form relationships, with the desire to connect with people, maybe the desire to banter back and forth with people. But there's something very potentially social about having a Libra rising in general. So what is really interesting about all of this is that these 3 houses together, the 6th, the 7th, and the 8th, they all very much have to do with the way you relate. And because you're talking about the 6th, the 7th, and the 8th, you are kind of straddling the horizon line here in a chart, which means that you're bringing the more personal stuff of the 6th house forward into the 7th and 8th as well. So, I mean, in a nutshell, this is just all about how you relate, Libra rising, and there's a very good chance that you're learning something really new about yourself in the way that you relate to other people. The conjunction itself is happening in the 8th house. The 8th house is a bit loaded. The 8th house is where the skeletons in the closet live. It's where people's baggage can be hidden away when you least expect it popping out at you. It's the house that really refers to other people's values, other people's connection to their own resources. So as you can imagine, it's kind of loaded. There's a lot of things going on here. So having the conjunction here means that you are learning a dramatically different way of relating to people's baggage, to their stuff. And before you get all, oh God, the 8th house, I also think that once you reach kind of the 8th house space of relationships, it's a more intimate space, and it's really where relationships become rich, where you start being able to share vulnerability because you realize you have to if you want to have real intimate connections. So there's a lot of stuff here about how you kind of manage conflict, how you manage other people's stuff coming at you, and you're due for a change. You're due for a wake up. You're due for a big shift because Venus rules both Libra, your rising sign, and Taurus, this 8th house. this is going to have a dramatic impact on your entire personality, on the way you present yourself with other people. I just think this is a huge opportunity for an awakening and to do things differently. Um, Let me just add a couple other things. We have added Venus because Venus rules Taurus, as I just mentioned, and is therefore a very, very important planet to look to when you're kind of looking at this conjunction and going, yeah, but how do I do that? And how do you do this, new boundary type of thing with people? Well, you learn how to be courageous in a different way in partnerships. You learn to occupy space in a way that is less apologetic, that is much more like I'm here, and I'm learning how to stand my ground in my partnerships in a new way, and it could be that you've overdone Aries in the past and been really fierce in relationships, or it could be that you're not standing up for yourself enough. So, ask yourself where you fall on that spectrum and recognize the pivot that's happened here due to the solar eclipse on April 8th. So that's where those two pieces fall. And meanwhile, the other piece is Mars. Mars rules all the Aries stuff, and Mars is in a really nice sextile with the conjunction between Jupiter and Uranus. So that is a statement about you need to take some kind of action in your routines. There's something about addressing all of these issues through the way that do daily routines, the things that you do to exercise, the way that you eat, the way you sleep. I know, Laura, you've really brought in this idea of lifestyle. Like, what is your lifestyle? And with Mars in the sixth house, you've had to make some shifts. You've had to address some issues about the way that you take care of yourself for your better health, really. So that plays in to this whole picture of this is all about you finding a new way in relationships. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting just thinking about, people with Libra rising tend to really just want to please everybody. I think of that with that Libra rising, and there's so much here with the eclipse happening there in Aries in the seventh house. It's like really developing the ability to really stand up for yourself in your relationships. And after all the work you've been doing while Saturn's been moving through that house where Mars is now, you've been really working hard to understand what's best for you on that level of your day-to-day routines. And then you're setting up this bravery and courage around really standing up for yourself in relationship. And all of that kind of culminates in some way with this conjunction between Jupiter and Uranus that is really about changing how you navigate other people's baggage. So yeah, like Jennie was saying, where are you on that spectrum of how do you navigate the difficult baggage that other people kind of bring and lay at your feet? Do you always try to please everybody around you? Has that been a difficulty in your life, kind of getting out from under that, trying to please everybody else? Because if that has been your pattern, which a lot of people with Libra rising struggle with, this is a real time when you can change that. Not like you want to become, so fierce that you don't let anybody in at all, but really taking care of yourself, changing the way you understand how to navigate other people's, this is about other people's money, other people's resources, other people's, all the things people carry baggage around. On a really positive note, maybe you'll get some huge inheritance.
Yeah.
I have to say that with Jupiter and Uranus conjunct in the eighth house, have to say that.
Yeah. I just want to mention one other thing because I remember getting a comment about why I have Libra rising and I'm not a people pleaser. So I just want to address that real quick because the other thing you have to think about if you are a Libra rising person, and if you are a Libra rising person and you don't get along with anybody, this is a great time to understand this part of your life because this is the mirror image, and if so, if you're over there with your Libra rising and you're really, being contrary with everybody, that's also a manifestation of where Libra can go when it's trying to kind of avoid itself, or even possibly use conflict as a way to avoid deep personal conflict. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that this can manifest. So I just want to throw it out there because I always want to hear people's experience, and address those questions. So,
Yeah.
who are you as a Libra rising person?
Yeah, Libra's such an interesting sign just because it's all about trying to find that balance. And yet it's an air sign. It's coming from an intellectual place. And if it doesn't have a job to balance things, it'll create upheaval in order to give itself that job again. I think
Yeah.
about that with Libra too. Libra's a fascinating sign, as they all are, right?
Yeah.
So
Okay.
let's move on to folks with Scorpio rising. Okay, if you've got Scorpio rising, first of all, in case you didn't listen to the beginning part of this video, let's just mention that we've got 3 areas highlighted. And these are, we've got Mars's transiting position, Venus's transiting position, and the transiting position of the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. These are all linked together because of rulerships, and these are all linked together. These 3 houses are really working together right now. The Venus in Aries here is showing up at the exact same point where the eclipse was on the 8th of April. So this is a kind of a continuing story from whatever pivot occurred or is in the process of occurring in your life from that eclipse. And that eclipse was in your 6th house. So there's some pivot that has occurred or is occurring in the area of your day-to-day routines. We can think of it as your lifestyle, how you take care of yourself. There's a way in which you are learning to kind of face that area and do it in your own authentic manner, not depending on anyone else, but really putting a stake in the ground for the courage to live the lifestyle you desire. Um, this is also contributing to the storyline here is the effort and work you've been putting into in the 5th house, which is the area of how you give of yourself, whether it be through creativity or, that 5th house is really about how we give love. Children, love affairs, creativity are all in there, how we give of ourselves. There's been a lot of learning there over the past year or so. And because Mars is in Jupiter's house, these are all connected. So we can think of the effort made to develop and understand your creativity, kind of bringing that energy into this shift and change and taking courage in your lifestyle. And all of these kind of supporting this big change in relationship. That Uranus-Jupiter conjunction is happening in the 7th house, which is intimate partnerships. It can be, your spouse or a business partner. It's generally thought of as contractual relationships, but it's those very, very connected kinds of relationships. There's a big change brewing there, about to happen there, that's supported by these other pieces.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'll let you talk.
Sounds good. Um, it's interesting. I'm thinking about this one, with Scorpio rising, is when you look at these 3 houses together, I mean, in a nutshell, you are certainly dealing with something to do with a major relationship, just as Laurie's been saying, for sure. Big shifts with that conjunction in the 7th house. But what's interesting is the other 2 houses are more personal to you. The other houses reflect more of your personal work, your personal way that you've needed to transform some things. Recently. And, Lori's kind of you touched on all these topics about it. But one thing that comes to mind for me is that one of the big questions where you have Pisces in the 5th house is going to be how you give of yourself. And one of the dangers of how you give of yourself is if you give of yourself too much, there's a possibility that you sacrifice too much of yourself in the way that you're giving of yourself. And especially, with Mars here, you're really going to see that lesson come forward. It's like where you fall in that spectrum. Like, is that something you're doing? Are you available to be giving of yourself in a way that recognizes the sensitivities of others, but also it could be that you give too much. And that's going to be one of the questions. You got to decide that for yourself and find that balance of where you can hold space for the sensitivities of others and be compassionate, but not lose yourself. Because that's going to be one of the dangers. And yeah, I really like how you talked about just the Venus, just some kind of way that you need to make sure it's kind of based on this idea of if you value yourself enough, then you're doing good things for your health, which the sixth house can really represent. That you're maybe learning that courage means something different. I mean, for example, maybe you have a bad habit and you've needed to shift that habit, and it can take a hell of a lot of courage to shift
Mm.
a habit, let's say like smoking. Or something like that. So there's some new pivot that you've made in that, and all of that is helping you just quite simply be a better partner. You've asked yourself these questions, you're kind of finding balance, and that's what is happening. And that's really how to rise to the challenge of what this conjunction suggests for you. So that's where the
You,
action is.
you think about that sudden big change in relationship. Yeah, that could mean all kinds of things. So pay attention to the people that come in and out of your life at this time, I would say. If a relationship starts at this point in your life, it's going to be a real game changer. One of the things with this conjunction between Jupiter and Uranus is it's changing your future. It's not just changing what's happening in this moment. This is going to, whatever big change happens in your career, I mean, in your relationship at this period of time, is going to profoundly change the future for you.
Yeah. Interesting. A lot, yeah, you're right. There's a lot of ways it could play out. So,
Yeah.
so do
Yeah.
tell how it plays out for those of you with Scorpio rising.
Yeah. Leave us a note. Okay. So we're going to move on to folks who have Sagittarius rising.
With Sagittarius rising, this is interesting. So you may have noticed that there are three houses here that Laurie and I have put on these charts. And that is because there's very much a process here that is being taking place for a while, really, when you really think about it. But in particular, during this eclipse season, we're looking at the impacts of these different transits and where it lands in your life, Sagittarius rising. And where this kind of in a nutshell lands in your life is fairly personal to you. These three houses are the fourth, the fifth, and the sixth house of your chart. The conjunction itself is happening in the sixth house of your routines and your daily habits and kind of the things that make up the material structure of your day-to-day life. That's where there's a big shift happening with this conjunction. But the three things together really are they're personal to you, and they're the ways that you're developing yourself in the way you relate to other people. That's in a nutshell what we're looking at. So to dig in a little further, I've mentioned that the conjunction is happening in this place of your routines and your habits. These are often the things that you do to maintain your daily life, but also to maintain your physical health. This is the reason why you exercise, the reason why you watch what you eat. You make sure that you eat enough vegetables and you're adding fruit to your diet and, those kinds of things. And then also, the way you move your body. Are you getting enough sleep? These are things that really spring out at us. But also like the habits that have to do with your work. Like, do you have enough training in your field? Do you need to develop some new habit to do something? So those are all kind of things that are up for grabs as far as like what kind of shift you may be experiencing in your life. So think about that, where that's landing for you. Um, the second piece here that kind of plays into those routines and those daily habits is the fifth house, which is where Venus is. Venus is exactly at the same spot from the Aries solar eclipse on April 8th. So there's a pivot here in the way you give of yourself. You know, the fifth house is where you kind of pour yourself into something, whether it's a child that you love or a creative project that you just lose yourself in. And it's very much about your self expression, your creative self expression. So there's something new here. There's a new way in which you are kind of boldly occupying this space and saying, I'm going to give of myself in this different way. And I'm just going to drop in and go for it. So that's part of the shift that feeds into routines. The other place is you've got Mars trundling away there in the fourth house. The fourth house is the very foundation of your personality, and it refers to your home in all sense of the word, your physical house, the home in your heart, the home as in the lineage that you were born into. So all of those things have to do with that fourth house and where you have Mars. So there's something that you're being asked to do, some kind of sensitivity in your home life that you're having to take action on. There's something that some way in which you are addressing that, or maybe you're needing to develop more compassion for yourself and your own childhood and whatever happened to you in those early days. Those are all potential topics. And all of those very much tie in with the routines you choose, the way you take care of yourself, where the big change is happening from the conjunction. So really a great opportunity to take care of yourself in a new way.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting to think of these three together, the development and effort that you've been putting into, to support your home, your family, that root core of you, and then with this eclipse, the change, the shift, the kind of pivot in terms of how you give of yourself or your creativity, and all of that kind of resulting or culminating in this Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. I think, the other thing about the sixth house, I like to think of it as, all of these things that Jenny's been talking about around taking care of your health and your body and all that really boils down to your lifestyle, how you live your day-to-day lifestyle. And this is where a huge change is occurring with this conjunction. Obviously, if you have a planet in any of the fixed signs around 21 degrees, it's going to be a lot bigger of a change than if there's, no connections to your personal planets. But nevertheless, look for big changes occurring in the area of your lifestyle. What is it that you're waking up to and realizing that there's a lot more that you can develop in this area of your lifestyle? Whatever change occurs here is going to, it's not just going to change what's going on this spring over the next few months. This is a change that will carry you into the future and change your future. So yeah, give that some thought. It's a fascinating process.
All right.
Indeed. Okay, so
Okay.
let's move on to folks who have Capricorn rising. Now, if you've got Capricorn rising, first thing you're going to notice here is we've highlighted three areas of the chart, three houses of the chart, rather than just the one where the Uranus Jupiter conjunction is occurring. We've highlighted your third, your fourth, and your fifth houses because these planets, the Uranus-Jupiter conjunction, is very intimately connected with Mars's movement through Pisces and Venus's movement through Aries. One of the interesting things, and we will focus on Jupiter and Uranus in a minute, but it's really fascinating that Venus right now, which rules Taurus, so it rules the planets here, Venus is sitting at this moment right at the spot where the eclipse happened on April 8th. So this is a continuation and totally connected with the pivot of that eclipse, which for you, those of you with Capricorn rising, the pivot, the courage to take on a big change is occurring there in your fourth house. It's a change in how you approach or manage, your life, your family, your children, your career, your career, your love, your romantic relationships, your career, your love, your family, your children, 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 your career, your energy within your family, within your home. There's some courageousness that you are really taking on. Now, Mars is also connected because it's ruled by Jupiter, whatever. It's connected nevertheless, and it's moving through your third house. This is really speaking to a lot of effort and development that's going on in terms of how you use your voice, how you communicate your thinking. There's a way where you're developing more compassion or more understanding of your own vulnerability in this area. So we can put these together, this learning compassion with your voice, this developing real courage in your family, and allowing that to support this big shift, this big explosive change that's happening in the fifth house. The fifth house being the area where we give of ourselves most directly. The fifth house is considered the house of children, love affairs, creativity. It's where we give of ourselves most directly. So think about that. What could this huge change in this area portend in your life? You probably have some idea. Maybe a new child is coming into your family. Maybe a child is leaving your family. Maybe, you've just fallen in love and there's a huge change in how you give of yourself. Or maybe you've just taken on a new creative path. Any of those things could be part of the storyline here. But whatever the change is, embrace it, allow it, and understand that whatever change is happening in how you give of yourself is a change that's going to really bring you into a new future.
Mm, yeah. It strikes me with this one too. It's like I think about Capricorn rising people and how they're those people walk in the room and they kind of come in with a gravitas, and as if they're the expert, whether they are or not. And so there's something very important about one's foundation when one is a Capricorn rising. And these three houses have to do with your foundation. This to me speaks of a moment in time when you are kind of redoing your foundation. You're essentially going in and looking at cracks in the foundation and maybe chucking out some parts that don't work for you anymore and paving in some new places. That's essentially what you're doing on a sort of metaphysical level. And as Laurie's talked about a lot here, like the key piece is, how do you give up yourself? How do you give of yourself with no fetters attached, like unconditionally? What is that about? What's happening? If you're a person with a bunch of Taurus in your chart, this is going to be particularly prevalent for you. But that's one piece. And then the other piece of the very foundation, the fourth house, which really does speak about your foundation and what has come to light here that is new for you, that you're discovering a new thing that means courage in this house. You're discovering like maybe it means something different than you thought. And perhaps you're able to appreciate yourself on a new level for where you do really show some like chutzpah in this area, like in your family life or your home life. So that's something that is, really has shown up. And as Laurie mentions, that pivot point you've been through to kind of look at that. And then the third piece of the Mars is like, okay, and how do you speak about all this? How are you talking about this self? Are you speaking in a way that reflects a sense of self-compassion for this work if you needed to do on yourself? Or are you speaking in a way that you can have sensitivity for the suffering of the people you're speaking to? Those are some of the topics that Mars is going to bring up. But it's very active with Mars. It's definitely, how are you talking about this, and how are you using your voice to move about your world, is going to be a very important piece to this major foundational shift that you're making. So, yeah.
That's great.
Mhm.
Yeah, well, enjoy that big explosion of creativity or love.
Mhm.
That's beautiful. I like where that is. Okay, let's move on to folks who have Aquarius rising.
All right, let's see. So those of you with Aquarius rising, let's just first start by mentioning that Laurie and I have chosen to include 3 houses because they all work together in a process. And as human beings, these things are always happening in a process. And so you can't really separate out this conjunction between Jupiter and Uranus without considering Venus, which is the ruling planet of that conjunction, and without considering Mars, which is in a really wonderful sextile with the conjunction itself. So these 3 things really tell a story and really kind of give us a pathway for what change may be afoot in your life as an Aquarius rising person. And, this is a big change because the 4th house, where the conjunction is, really refers to the foundation of your personality, the basis on which you do everything else. So this is your home life, your internal home that's in the heart, your physical home that you live in, your home as far as the lineage you came from, the land underneath wherever you rest your head every night. These are all topics through which you are experiencing change. I mean, a huge obvious one with this would be something like, have you moved? Are you due for a move? Are you moving house? Are you moving out of state? Are you moving out of the country? Those would be some pretty big questions. But this could be much more internal for you. It really depends what's going on in your life. But no matter what, there's some shift and there's something profound that's waking you up, and perhaps even providing you with a new sense of liberation, because your home life or your foundation feels a certain way to you. So that's kind of where the key piece is happening. Some of the other players. So the next step is to look at Venus. Venus is in the 3rd house, and again, that conjunction is kind of looking at Venus, going, "Hey, Venus, how do we do this?" And Venus is saying, "Well, you know what? You need to speak from the heart. You need to go ahead and be courageous in the way that you talk. You need to use your voice to articulate what kind of shift you need to make at your foundation." And the way that you speak and the way you communicate is helps you create your reality. It helps you create this change in the foundation of your personality that you're aiming to make. The 3rd player here is Mars in Pisces going through the 2nd house. It's in a really nice sextile with this conjunction. So Mars is where you need to take action. It's also another place of action. And here the action is something about getting really clear about the worth that you bring. It might be a way that you need to put your money where your mouth is, that you need to go ahead and set some money aside to something that you really care about. That's part of this change or this move that you're making. And also it could be that you need to simply develop more compassion for yourself. That could be a very simple way that this would manifest in your life. So those 3 things are coming together, the sense of your self-worth, the way you use your voice, and this big shift that's kind of has a like an earthquake like effect at the very roots of your personality or your home life. So
That's great. I love thinking about that. What is the shakeup going to be? So leave us notes if you have Aquarius rising, and let us know, what is the big shakeup within your home, within your family, within your ancestral line? And it could be so many things. Like Jenny said, it could be, you're moving across the country or to another country or just next door. But, there's some big shakeup there. It could also have something to do with a shakeup in the life of a family member that really impacts you, or family coming or going, or I don't know, something in that area that is really going to. One of the things that I think about with this conjunction is whatever change occurs here isn't just a change for this month or this spring. It's a change that's going to really bring you into the future. These are Uranus moves so slowly. Anything that involves Uranus is going to change us on a fundamental level that's not going to just let up next weekend, and Jupiter is a 12-year cycle. So this is the change that occurs within your home, family, the core, is going to really change the storyline of your future going forward. It's pretty
yeah,
cool. Pretty
yeah,
cool. I like this conjunction. I think it's very exciting. It can be stressful, but it's quite exciting having these kind of changes come along.
Yeah.
So
So, okay.
let's move on to those of you with Pisces rising. So if you've got Pisces rising and you're listening to this, first of all, you notice that we've highlighted 3 houses rather than just the one where the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction shows up. We've highlighted these 3 areas because it's sort of like we're looking at it as this process that we're in the middle of, because Mars in Pisces right now, Venus in Aries right now, and the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction are all connected. They're connected through rulership. They're also connected because Mars is in a sextile to this conjunction of Uranus and Jupiter. So first of all, the conjunction itself is happening in your 3rd house. The 3rd house is the area where we think of as it's about our communication style, all the things around communication, but it's also about our environment and the people that are in our environment, not necessarily the people we choose. The 3rd house can relate to our siblings, our neighbors, the people that we interact with just on a day-to-day level. Um, so with this big shift, this big profound change happening in that area, you want to think about those relationships, how there could be a change in those. This could signify a big change in a relationship with a sibling or a neighbor. It could also just, and I don't mean just as unimportant, but it could refer to a huge awakening of your voice and how you use it. Now, if we bring in Venus, which is ruling these 2 planets because they're in the Venus ruled sign of Taurus, Venus is also sitting right now at the point where the eclipse was on the 8th of this month. So there's been a pivot happening in this area. For you with Pisces rising, this pivot is happening in your 2nd house, which is the house that relates to your self-worth, your money, your resources. There's some way in which you are taking on a new courageous understanding of your self-worth. And that is contributing to this awakening of your voice. We bring in Mars as well in your 1st house. There's been a lot of development with Saturn moving through that area as well. There's been a lot of development over the past year of really understanding who you are. And with Mars in there, there's action that needs to be taken on your new developing understanding of who you are. There's something around developing compassion for yourself. And then the Venus, taking an active, courageous role in the development of your self-worth. And these really supporting this big awakening of how you use your voice. And, one of the things with this conjunction is it's kind of it's setting the stage for a long-term change. So the shift and change, the awakening of how to use your voice isn't going to end next week or next month. This is a long range change in your understanding of the power and significance of your own voice.
Hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is an interesting one. I mean, it's interesting to think about these 3 areas together too, and that's kind of what I'm thinking about bringing into this one with Pisces rising. It's just these are 3 very personal to you areas. I mean, these are the first 3 houses of the whole mandala of the house system. So it's kind of like in terms of development, it's you recognizing as a tiny little baby that you have a body and a different identity, and then you start using your voice in the 3rd house. So that's an easy way to kind of understand there's a sort of simplicity to these 3. I mean, very personal to you, and very much about your kind of just you doing you, like you kind of bringing yourself into this. And I think that's in a nutshell what you're looking at. So big change in your personal life somehow. And I do think, Lori, has covered the idea of this big shift happening in the third house. The third house, is also your local environment. It can be relatives. Those might be a couple other topics that you see some big change. Certainly, we forget about how much our neighborhoods impact us. Until there's like construction going on in your neighborhood, or till there's something going on, with the city that you're like, oh wow, okay, so there's some change that could happen on that level too. And I also think, it's interesting as a Pisces rising person, you're definitely here walking around the world with the ability to be sensitive to the needs of the collective, the needs of other people, to kind of recognize, times to tread lightly. And you also can kind of project a sense of compassion out into the world. And that's something we all really need. So having Mars here right now really is saying, yeah, take some action where you can really, bring forward, project that idea of being empathetic to other people and looking at the spectrum, because lots of people have different needs and it's really easy to kind of forget. Like, try breaking a limb and you'll find out real quick, how hard it is to get around. And it brings this sense of empathy, like, whoa, okay, so that's something that you can really project, those a Pisces rising person, is that kind of care into the world. So that might be part of whatever this parcel is for you. And then, yeah, I love that pivot of the something about your self-worth. Like maybe you're learning how to just step up for yourself in a whole new way, that you hadn't realized before. And maybe part of that includes that vulnerability. It takes a lot of courage to show your vulnerability. And Venus brings in the idea of kind of appreciating yourself for whatever you are being able to do. So anyway, that's kind of my take on this. I think, Lori said it all really eloquently already.
There-
Yeah.
I was just thinking as you were talking about that Venus in the second house, it might be about the audacity of spending some money on yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Really giving yourself permission if you've been somebody who's taken care of other people, or, just been so sensitive to the world that it might not be easy. You might need to really dig into some courage to, yeah, take care of yourself in a different way. And I love that you brought up for the third house, the idea of our neighborhood. I think that's really, really important. Yeah, that big shift, it might be happening with your voice. It might be happening with your sibling. It might be happening with your neighbor downstairs, or it might be happening in the neighborhood itself. So yeah, pay attention to big shifts occurring in those areas that are going to change you and how you move forward in the world. That's really fascinating.
Nice. All
All right.
right.
Well, we covered them all. We did it. And thank you, Jenny. This has been fun.
Yes. Thank you everybody for watching, and thank you, Lori. It's fun to work with you. And I
As
hope you get
always.
something out of it.
Okay, thank you.